Marks, LBC's US correspondent, and we have former Government Special Advisor Charlie Rowley with us too. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you'd like to ask our panel a question. You can text it to 84850 and you can send it via Alexa. Just say, Alexa, send a message to LBC, and miraculously it'll pop up on my screen. There are lots of them doing so already. And don't forget, you can watch us on Global Player as well.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
There'll be no argy-bargy, there'll be no pushing, there'll be no fisticuffs, unlike in the lobbies in the House of Commons this evening. We might get some more information on that over the course of the next hour, so do stay with us. Right, let's go to our first question. It's from Jay in St Ives, not in Cornwall, in Cambridgeshire. Hello, Jay.
Yes. Hello, hi, panel. My question is Elizabeth Truss officially a toast?
Very short question. Nadia Whittome, let's come to you. I think we kind of know what your answer might be, but...
I think there only is one answer to this question. What we've seen today, honestly, and I'm still in shock. I've just come from the chamber.
You're almost
and
shaking.
It's absolute carnage there. I've never seen anything like it. We've seen today the beginning of the day, we had PMQs. We saw a live U-turn from Liz Truss, directly contradicting what the Chancellor said on the pensions triple lock. And then the fracking motion was a no confidence vote, and then it wasn't, and then it was. Now we've got these resignations, reports of whips manhandling a crying Tory MP into the lobby. We've got a government that is not governing, it's not functioning, and the only outcome can be that we need a general election. That's the only thing that can happen.
Which is exactly what a lot of our listeners are saying. And my question to them, and I'll put it to you, is, well, how do you bring it about?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? And that's why, so we obviously don't live in a country where we have a recall system, so the public can't just demand a general election, we get one. The only way that can happen is by Tory MPs voting for one. And actually, I'd like to appeal directly to Tory MPs, not that they're only listening, because Douglas Ross pulled out of this, the leader of the Scottish Tories, the MP for two cities, who was meant to be on, has also pulled out. But I'd like to say to those MPs, please put the interests of the country above your own self-interest, your own careers, even if it costs you your seat, because it's a circus in there, but this isn't funny. The real life impact is that people are struggling. People already can't pay the bills. They can't pay their rent. They can't make their mortgage payments. They are terrified, and the government has absolutely no answers.
Jimmy, you've worked in Downing Street. You've been sort of in and around the Conservative Party for a very long time. I don't imagine you've ever seen anything like this. Is there a way out of it? And just answer Jay's question first. Is Liz Truss officially toast?
Well, it's clearly not sustainable what's happening, and when you've got resignations happening left, right and centre from the Cabinet, it can't go on. What I think Tory MPs need to work out fast is what they're going to do about it, because at the moment you've only got sort of 5 or 6 that are saying that the PM needs to go. Obviously the chatter and everything that's going on in Parliament, it's much different to that. There is no real clear mechanism. I mean, you say there isn't one for a general election, there also isn't really about how you bring a change of leadership about with the rules that are in place with the 1922 committee, obviously formed a century ago today. So I think that Tory MPs need to work out what they want to do, and they need to work it out fast. Things haven't been happy this week, and they need to now work out what the kind of mechanisms are, and they need to get their house in order because of the points that Nadia makes. This is people are really struggling out there at the moment, and that needs to be the focus.
Charlie Rowley, you stepped in at the last minute. We're very grateful to you for that. As Nadia just revealed, 2 Conservative MPs pulled out. We don't want you to think of yourself as sloppy seconds, but I mean...
I've been called much worse. I can assure you.
I mean, how do you think Liz Truss is officially toast? We should say that you also used to work for Michael Gove, who, shall we say, has had a few hands in a few pies over the past few weeks.
Well, for the reasons that Jimmy just set out, the answer is no, she's not, because without a mechanism to call a general election or to assume a new Prime Minister, then no. And I think it goes just beyond the process for the reasons that we've all seen over the last few weeks, where there was we've had a change in Chancellor, we've had a change in economic direction, which is obviously the right thing to do for the country to tackle the issues that Nadia pointed out, people's rent, people's mortgages, the cost of living crisis. Jeremy Hunt has now assumed the role as Chancellor, which has been a warm welcome. And I think the changes that we're seeing today, even though it is not ideal in the space of 1 week to lose your Chancellor, Home Secretary, and if the reports are correct, your Chief Whip, the replacements that are coming to fill those roles are absolutely warmly welcome, I think, by the Conservative.
Well, they're warmly welcomed by your old boss, Michael Gove, aren't they?
Well, I think, they're both two appointments of great experience. They've worked with Michael previously in the Cabinet. Grant Shapps, I think, will be a brilliant Home Secretary. And as we've already seen, Jeremy Hunt is getting on with the job of being the Chancellor to deal with the difficult decisions that this country faces, which is why I think if you have more people around the Cabinet that are able to demonstrate that sort of commitment to the cause, then Liz will...
Liz Truss has
I hope
got
they've got
every
you a
single
seat lined
call
up,
wrong.
because you're doing an honourable job of defending the party line that not a single Tory MP will.
Thank you, I think. But, I just think it's just worth
Put it on your
reminding...
CV, Charlie, as endorsed by Nadia Whittome.
Nadia, yes, I don't know if that's better for my career or for your... But look, I think it is just a reality of the situation that there won't be a general election for what we've just discussed. Tory MPs are not going to vote for it. So the Conservative government is going to... Whoever is in the government, it is going to be a Conservative Party governing the country for the next couple of years. And when you've got the experience that is in the Cabinet now, I think that is why the government will continue until the next general election in 2024, 2025.
Simon Marks, you covered the Trump years, obviously, for us. I think we had you on virtually every day during that period. Slightly less so in the last 18 months or so. I think you've been in the country for the last few days. What do you make of this, just looking on from outside?
It's absolutely stunning. It is absolutely stunning, panoramically, to watch what's taking place here. I mean, even by the standards of crazy, which I lived through for 4 or 5 years in the US and will no doubt be returning to, because who knows where we're going to head after the midterm elections and into the next presidential election, to see the democracy in your home country atrophying before your eyes. I mean, you were asking last night, the government minister that you had on your programme yesterday. Exactly. What do manifestos mean? Right? Does a manifesto mean nothing now? We lived through a period in the United States. In the 2020 presidential election, Donald Trump and the Republican Party had no manifesto. They didn't offer a platform to the American public. They couldn't be bothered to put one together at the convention. They said, just read the 2016 one. That's what he's going to do again in 2020. I mean, how you return, and the Republican Party, as you know, has failed to return to its constitutional moorings, how this country returns to its democratic moorings the longer this continues, I think is a massive question. But, to answer Jay's question, is Liz Truss toast? Well, the astonishing thing is that tonight she still isn't toast, even though I think we could all agree that, as the Americans say, stick a fork in her, she's done. But she's not done. She's still at number 10, and that is just astonishing.
She would, look, she's Prime Minister. If you have the job of Prime Minister, you don't want to give it up. Theresa May didn't want to give it up. Boris Johnson certainly didn't want to give it up. Liz Truss won't want to give it up, particularly because she would go down as the shortest serving Prime Minister in our entire history, because she has to get to January the 8th to beat George Canning, who served 119 days. I love bringing these little facts into the conversation.
You should write a book about it.
I should. I really should. But, of course, you compare what's going on here with what's going on in America. I mean, Joe Biden clearly also wouldn't want to step down as president, even though I think most objective people look at him and think he probably should.
But when the emperor, or the empress in this case, is so obviously devoid of clothing, when every single element of her mini-budget has now been reversed and flattened, when everything that she said on the hustings now has been undone, I mean, what is the point? I mean, even the most, even someone with the most self-belief would surely be questioning whether actually for the good of the nation, never mind for the good of themselves, this is the right thing to be doing. I think it's astounding.
Nadia Whittome, why didn't Sir Keir Starmer go in for the kill at PMQs? Because I thought he let Liz Truss off today, and I was wondering, the cynical side of me was wondering if that was deliberate, in that he or Labour in general think it's a good thing for Liz Truss to stay. It's good for Labour.
No, I don't think there's that feeling. I think it would be very easy. Some people are saying, get the popcorn out, but on the Labour benches, no one is, because we can see the real impact that this is having on people's lives. Maybe it would be funny if it wasn't for the fact that people, and I'm not being hyperbolic here, but people are literally starving. Over 5 million people are already saying that they're going without food. 1 in 5 adults were falling behind on at least one household bill, and that was back in August. Now winter's coming, things are going to be even worse, and as I say, the government just doesn't have any answers. I suppose for Keir Starmer, he's spoilt for choice as to what to attack her on, because there's a U-turn hour by
today
hour.
was about a book that Harry Cole is writing, and I'm thinking, is that really how you're going to skewer the Prime Minister? Surely what he should have said is, I'm going to announce now that we will abide by the pensions triple lock. Will the Prime Minister?
Well, I'm glad that he went for her on cuts, because, in fact, that was the question that I was bobbing to ask a question, and that's what I was going to say. That last week, Liz Truss said that there would be absolutely no cuts, and then shortly afterwards, the new Chancellor said that there would be spending cuts and government departments would have to look for efficiencies. We cannot go back to austerity, and there is no mandate to do that. In fact, there's no mandate for anything that Liz Truss has done.
But she did say today that spending would be up this year and it will be up next year, so that's not austerity, is it?
Well, that's not what her Chancellor says. Who should we believe?
Fair question.
But there's no normal here. I mean, that's the most striking thing to me, coming from having lived through abnormal. This was supposed to be the political transition that brought the adults back into the room, that brought some semblance of normal back to what had been a highly abnormal, chaos-driven process. And suddenly, there's absolutely no normal. I mean, James Cleverly was on this morning, right? I mean, talking about the triple lock. And then they completely undo that hours later. Even the internal communication seems to be all over the shop.
Well, it does indeed. Now, the Conservative MP Alexander Stafford, we were talking about him just before 8. He's just tweeted, after those claims that he was marched in tears through the voting lobby, he's tweeted this: "Lots of rumours flying around tonight. This vote was never about fracking, but about Labour trying to destabilise the country and take control of Parliament. I had a frank and robust conversation," translated that means a row, "outside the voting lobbies, confirming my opposition to fracking with members of the government. Nothing more. Reconfirming my position, which I spoke about in the chamber this evening." Now, he did vote with the Conservatives this evening, which ostensibly means that he voted in favour of fracking when he's against it, and has 2 fracking sites in his constituency, which he's consistently spoken out against. But of course, thinking back, the Jacob Rees-Mogg, Therese Coffey, the Deputy Prime Minister, they're both accused tonight of manhandling MPs, whether it's Alexander Stafford, I don't know, into the so-called right voting lobby. Chris Bryant says he has photographic evidence of what was going on and has called for an inquiry. So we might talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. If you'd like to ask our panel a question, 0345 6060 973. And we have an Alexa question coming up. It's 8:15.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
19 minutes past 8, it's Cross Question. We have Charlie Rowley, former government special advisor. He basically is the government spokesman on this panel tonight because no one else was willing to be. Sorry, again, that sounds awful. I really, because we are very grateful to you for coming.
I'll just go now.
Nadia Whittome is Labour MP for Nottingham East. She's having great fun tonight, as you can imagine. Jimmy McLoughlin well, you know what I mean. It's the host of the podcast Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. Tell us a little bit about the podcast, Jimmy.
So we interview entrepreneurs about where they're creating jobs. So one of the things when I was in Number 10 was that we get lots of stories about Debenhams closing and so on, and it'd be my job to go in and tell the Prime Minister that wonderful news. And she would often say, well, you know, where are all these sort of new jobs being created, etc. And it's from entrepreneurs creating 5 or 6 jobs a day, but that never gets reported. So that's what the podcast tries to do.
And it's become quite a big thing, hasn't it? Because I must admit, when I heard you were starting, I thought, well, how's that going to get a big audience? But you have.
Yeah, well, I think people are interested in it, right? I mean, it's careers advice. What one of the things that we're trying to do is democratise careers advice for younger generations, because there's never been a better time to be starting or building a career, because there's loads of jobs and opportunities out there. But there are so many now. You know, the system of when, you know, of being an accountant, a law, or going into the medical profession or whatever, like it's all become so much more dispersed, and so that's what we're trying to shine a light on.
And Simon Marks is here as well, LBC's US correspondent. I don't need him to explain what he does, you all know what he does. Now, a brief Alexa question from Mick, who says, do you think the Daily Star's lettuce will end up outlasting Liz Truss? I suppose I should explain that for those who don't know. The Daily Star have got a lettuce which they are taking photographs every day, and it obviously a lettuce degenerates over time, and they think that it will probably outlast Liz Truss. Do you, Simon?
I'm interested in the lettuce. I should just say that the last time I was on Cross Question, I should alert my fellow panellists. It was either the last time or the time before. Suella Braverman was in one of these seats. So when you go home tonight and there's a ladder, you might want to walk around. Yeah, I think it was 2 times ago.
I don't even remember she was on.
But yes, she was. But the lettuce, I think, is interesting. I was almost wondering whether it would be, thinking of Suella Braverman, to be more apt actually to have some kind of a tofu cam. Because, you know, when you cook tofu, you've got to drain it of all the water and you put it on the paper towels. You're not a tofu eater, clearly. But I almost thought, you know, would the tofu cam be more apt? Will the lettuce outlast her? I don't know. I'm not convinced it will.
Well, they have
certainly looking healthier, isn't it?
They have given the lettuce a box of tofu, apparently.
Have they?
Yeah,
there you go.
Corey, so it must be true. Charlie?
Well, it's not a lonely lettuce now, is it, if it's got a box of tofu next to it? But I think Liz will outlast the lettuce.
Really? You surprised me. Nadia?
Well, as I say, I think the lettuce is certainly looking a lot healthier than Liz Truss is tonight. She was reportedly one of the Tory MPs who didn't vote on the vote that was meant to be a confidence vote in her government. Look, if she's the second Tory PM to be got rid of, then that will be the second Prime Minister who the country hasn't had a say over. That's ridiculous. It can't be the case that this goes back to Tory members
the
again.
third, if you think back to Margaret Thatcher.
I meant consecutively.
Right, okay.
But that there are no words for it. But basically, we've got a situation where the public hasn't given a mandate to her. They've gone back on many manifesto commitments. The Tory membership, the majority of them, want Liz Truss to resign, and they only voted for her 6 weeks ago.
Fickle bunch, aren't they, Jimmy?
Yes. I mean, you've chaired the hustings as well in the past, but it's an extraordinary times that we're in at the moment with what's happening. I mean, I don't think it will go to a membership vote again if that happens. I think it will be the parliamentary party that decides it. And I think this is one of the problems that actually Liz Truss has got, is when David Cameron and Boris Johnson won the party membership votes, they had over 50% of the MPs supporting them from the offset. So in effect, the membership were almost rubber stamping the parliamentary party's problem. Liz Truss's problems have begun with the fact that she only had a third of the party backing her, the parliamentary party, and I think that's quite an important distinction. And she is now trying to reach out across the party with the appointments she's making in Jeremy Hunt, Grant Shapps, Greg Hands as well, Trade Minister at the weekend. But it's a real problem that she's having to do that kind of 40 days in.
Jacob Rees-Mogg has said tonight, wait for this is a government that is functioning well. Spin that one, Charlie Rowley.
Well, the answer is, and look, Jacob is in the cabinet and I'm not, so he's obviously going to hold that view. But I honestly just would implore, if people are minded to, you've got to be open about it. And it has been not the best start. Obviously, that is plain to see. And even if you have the ideas and the ambition to come in and cut taxes, to go for growth, to do all of the things that Liz wanted to do. Now, obviously, we know what happened in the events of last week. It hasn't worked. It wasn't the right time. It's been junked. What you then have to do is recognise the decisions that you take going forward. And it was absolutely right to bring in a sensible, pragmatic Chancellor like Jeremy Hunt. It has been sensible today to, in the event of Suella resigning, and whatever you think about that resignation, by her own admission, she fell below the standards of what was expected. She has broken the rules. She has gone. The replacement of Grant Shapps is obviously the right thing to do. It is showing leadership to appoint people to these roles. It is showing a demonstration that you are in control now going forward, that your tent is wider, that the number of people that you have around you in terms of the ideas and their experience is valued. Now, tonight, it's another unforced error by the sounds of things in terms of the fracking vote. Clearly, there's some confusion. I'm not actually completely sure if Wendy is in the tent or not anymore.
But she's not.
If she's not, then obviously the next thing to do is, as the Prime Minister, is to appoint a Chief Whip that can command the respect and the authority of the government, that has an 80-seat majority, and continue to govern. That is what Liz will be doing tonight, and that's what she'll be doing tomorrow morning.
Right, let's go to another caller, Dave in London Colney. Hello, Dave.
Oh, hello there. Well, I'd like to put a sort of brush question to all the panel, which is basically, I think any government would find it very difficult, even more difficult now, to govern, given the multiples of demographic values these days and the regional demographic variance there are. You've got professional and industrial with employment categories. You've got generational differences, cultural differences, gender identity, multimedia allegiances, etc., etc. To refer back to previous governments' achievements and conduct, they're different days then.
Well, you're right, but successful parties are relatively broad-based coalitions. You look at our most successful prime ministers or even US presidents, Simon, they appealed beyond their own parties. You look at Bill Clinton, you look at Ronald Reagan, you look at Margaret Thatcher, you look at Tony Blair. They got people to vote for them who weren't natural allies of them. And that, I think, any successful party in the future is going to have to do that. And Boris Johnson, actually, you could say, was very successful in doing that.
Well, if you look at the genius of Donald Trump, the genius of Donald Trump was to realise before anybody else in the country that the American electorate was ready for their politics to be turned into a reality TV drama. That's what he did. He mainstreamed people from the far right that had been left out in the outer fringes of the dark internet, and he turned politics into a made-for-TV drama. And American politics to this day is still struggling from that and trying to find a way back to some semblance of orthodox political behaviour. With the end of Boris Johnson's government, clearly, for months and years, you'd been lurching from one crisis to the next, most of them self-created by the Prime Minister and people around him. There was then the hope that there might be an opportunity to row back to a more normal time where there could be considered political conversation, considered philosophical discussion about the great issues that beset the country, never mind the domestic economic crises. Look at the international situation. Vladimir Putin today declaring martial law in 4 of those regions that he seized. And yet we're still, on this side of the Atlantic, in this 24-hour crisis loop, amplified as it is, and I think the caller was absolutely right, by the development of social media, the 24-hour constant news cycle. It is a different country in that regard. But if you can't find a way out of this perpetual crisis loop, then I think the American example suggests that it's very, very dangerous for the future of your democracy.
Jimmy?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is one of the challenges of what's happening at the moment is that we're focusing so inwardly on UK politics, and there are massive global issues to be at place. And this is supposed to be, taking opportunities of post-Brexit Britain. And at the moment, we're just not able to do that because we're focused on these internal rows constantly. And I think it's a real problem that at the moment, we don't know what the Conservative Party stands for. And this comes to the problem of what the Prime Minister has got at the moment and is facing, is she said that she was all about growth, and you get growth from low taxes. And she just reversed all of the tax cuts that were proposed at the mini-budget. So what is the Conservative Party for? If Liz Truss is going to have any way of going forward, she has got to explain what that is. And at the moment, I just don't think there's very clear answers for what the Conservative Party stands for.
But is anyone willing to even listen to her now? That's the problem. She can try and do that, but I'm not sure the voters are generally willing to listen to her. She's got a 7% approval rating.
Yeah, I mean, who are the 7%? I mean, I think that it's pretty extraordinary to sort of think about, the fact that she's not able to have her chief whip remain on side is a huge problem. When you lose the confidence of the chief whip and the deputy chief whip to the point where they can't stay, then that is a real problem for party discipline. Even during Theresa May and Boris Johnson's darkest periods, the sort of whip's office remained intact.
Nadia?
God, look, I mean, I agree with Dave about parties being broad. We're in a two-party system, which necessarily means that both main parties have to be quite broad alliances. In the Labour Party, we've got people from lots of different kind of political tendencies, and I think that's a good thing. I think when we have lots of different views, that's when we come to better policy. But the Labour Party is not bitterly divided in the way that the Tory Party absolutely is. We're united and we're ready to govern. Just give us a general election, give people the opportunity to
It's true to a point, but you have said that Keir Starmer needs to be bolder, right?
Yeah, of course, and that's fine. We should be able to disagree with each other, to disagree well, to push for certain policies. That's what being in a democratic party and a democratic country is about. But
I think there is a thing that people say they want a general election. I understand that, but I do think if we end up with one in the next sort of 6 weeks, there is a problem that the Labour Party don't get the scrutiny that they deserve at this point, because they are now the sort of favourites to be in government next. And actually, I think one of the things that Keir Starmer needs to put forward some plans about what he's going to do to solve all these crises, because it's not a simple issue because of all the international issues we spoke about. I'm not absolving the kind of Conservatives and the mini budget of it, but there's a plethora of things here, and I do just think that actually there needs to be proper scrutiny of what the Labour Party. I've got to go to the news in a second, so a quick word from Charlie.
No, I just said, look, I think for all the faults that we know that have taken place over the last couple of weeks, the Conservative Party needs to get it back on track. But the polling that we were just picking up on slightly still suggests that it is the government that is, at the moment, because of the mistakes that have been made, that may lose the election. It's not the opposition that's going to win it. And I think the polling still doesn't come out to say or to suggest that the country is waiting. And waiting with bated breath for Sir Keir Starmer to be the next Prime Minister.
If there was a general election tomorrow
in the polls.
But I don't think that's for the Labour Party or for Sir Keir Starmer to be.
There's a 36% lead for Labour.
If there was an election tomorrow, the Tory Party would be lucky to even be the official opposition, let alone running the country.
Yeah, as I said,
damning.
Probably because of too many unforced errors on our side. But the Conservative Party can turn it around. I don't think it's a huge endorsement for the Labour Party for its policies, for the reasons that you say, Nadia. Sir Keir needs to be bolder himself.
We have bold policies. We've pledged £28 billion a year for a Green New Deal. We'll close
the
yeah, well, but at least there is a whole list.
Okay.
What is this government?
Right, well, maybe we'll
proposing?
speak more a little about Labour's policies. If you want to ask about that, you're very welcome to do so. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's Cross Question at 8:33, and Daryl Jackson has the news headlines.
It's reported the government's chief whip has resigned this evening following a vote on fracking in the Commons, but even the business secretary says it's not clear if that's true. 6 Tory MPs have publicly called for the Prime Minister to step down. Well, the Conservatives tonight won that vote in the House of Commons in what was originally considered a confidence vote, but Labour's Chris Bryant claims he saw some MPs being manhandled and bullied before it took place. And 39 Conservative MPs failed to vote this evening. They include a minister and the Prime Minister herself, Liz Truss. LBC weather, blustery showers heading north this evening, drier in the southwest, a low of 11 degrees.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:37 is the time on LBC. It's Cross Question. We have with us Nadia Whittome, Labour MP for Nottingham East, former Government Special Advisor Charlie Rowley, Jimmy McLoughlin, who is host of the podcast Jimmy's Jobs of the Future, and Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent. Our next questioner is Simon in Bushy. Hello, Simon. Simon, talk to us. No, he's not going to talk to us. OK. Well, his question is, I can tell you, is it time for Boris Johnson to come back? Charlie?
As appealing to some as that may be, in my view, that won't be the right thing to do for a number of reasons. And I think, however dramatic and uncertain the situation is now, I think we will not be rewarded particularly well for bringing back Boris, who obviously left.
I mean, the question could have been, should he come back from his holiday in the Caribbean, where he is at the moment, apparently, which, I mean, I think is extraordinary given that Parliament's sitting.
Yes, that's a perfectly legitimate question to ask. And with an 80-seat majority, you may allow a bit more fluidity in terms of attendance, but that is a question worth asking. But should he return as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom or to lead the Conservative Party? I don't think that's right. I think after the 2 years of the whole country went through in terms of the pandemic, followed by Partygate, followed by a series of mistakes that took and missteps that took place in Number 10 under his watch, I don't think that would be right. I don't think that's what the public would reward us for.
There is a logical argument for him to return. Let me play devil's advocate here, and I'm not advocating this myself before anybody starts. But if the collective Conservative Party decides, well, we've lost the next election and it's going to be cataclysmic, then you could argue that someone with a proven track record of electoral success could actually mitigate the scale of the losses. I mean, I don't think anybody at the moment would say, well, he could turn it around and win, but there is a certain logic to that, isn't there?
No, there is a certain logic, and there's a place for Boris. There'll always be a place for Boris in the Conservative Party as a campaigner, as an advocate, and
as a liar,
and as somebody that put forward a manifesto in 2019 which was about uniting and levelling up the country, and levelling up was a department that I was obviously part of. I'd like to see more of that in this new government, if I can be slightly critical tonight. And we're getting back to that. It's a compassionate Conservative Party that wants to see all parts of the UK thrive. And, as I say, a former Health Secretary that's now the Chancellor of the Exchequer will obviously protect the NHS and the most vulnerable. That's what the plans that he's set out earlier this week. That's what we'll see on the 31st of October. But Boris will obviously be an advocate for the party and for the government, but I don't think he should return to Number 10, no.
Nadia.
It's a valiant effort at spinning it, but it's just not true, is it? You haven't levelled anything up. It's been kicking down all the way through. On Simon's question, well, what a choice. Should we have the man who broke his own laws and then repeatedly lied about it, or should we have the woman who is constantly U-turning and doesn't have any solution for the crisis that people in this country are facing? The two issues are basically that we've got the mini budget, which, don't need me to take you through it, has been an unmitigated disaster, not just incompetent, but frankly economic vandalism, causing run on the pound, potentially even risking a global financial crash. And then we've also had austerity for 10 years previously, which meant that our public services were going into a cost of living crisis completely ill-equipped. We didn't have the social safety net that people rely on. And instead of investing in those 10 years when interest rates were extremely low, the lowest they've ever been in history, the government didn't do that. So now what do? Well, we need to tax the rich. Needs to be paid for by someone, and it can't be paid for by working people. And we need to be borrowing, but only to invest, not to be funding tax cuts for your super rich mates.
Jimmy.
To the question about whether Boris Johnson should come back, I mean, I'm not sure whether he would want to, frankly, at this stage. I do think it's an interesting question about what happens next if there is a leadership election. If he were to throw his hat in the ring, I mean, it would be pretty extraordinary. And there's no doubt he's got a big following within the parliamentary party. I do think one of the things that is sort of being reported a lot at the moment is that Conservative MPs can't decide what to do because they don't know what's going to come next. I think it's quite difficult, actually, for the Conservative Party to know what is going to come next, and I'm not sure that's necessarily a good enough reason to delay things. So it goes back to the first point I made at the top of the hour about Conservative MPs need to make a decision about what's happening because it is unsustainable at the moment.
Simon?
I mean, I'm with Jimmy. Unless there's something going on behind the scenes that we absolutely can't see, there's no indication that he wants to come back. I mean, not only is he on holiday in the Caribbean, but before that, he's been on the mashed potato circuit in America. He was giving a speech to insurance agents or the travel industry. I mean, he needs to, as we've all heard from his aides and friends, he sees this now as his opportunity to make the money that he was unable to make during the period that he was he was at number 10 Downing Street. I don't see any indication that he's a viable part of the conversation. But again, maybe all of those conversations are taking place behind the scenes, and his mobile phone's getting very sandy.
We're going to move away from this subject for the last 15 minutes of the programme. Some of you, Charlie, might be relieved to hear. 0345 6060 973. It's coming up to 8:45.
LBC. Hear that? Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:48 is the time on LBC. Nadia, Whittome, Charlie Rowley, Jimmy McLoughlin and Simon Marks with us taking your calls. Still time to call in if you'd like to. 0345 6060 973. Pete is in Leeds. Hi, Pete.
Thank you for taking my call.
What would you like to ask?
What it is, I'd like to know, we've got a cost of living crisis going on, in our country at the minute. And we're sending billions of pounds to Ukraine, supporting that war effort there. And I just, people can't afford to pay the energy bills in this country. How does it all stack up, this?
Well, you think we shouldn't be sending anything to Ukraine?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying.
Well, what are you saying?
That. Well, don't you think we ought to be looking after people in our own country first?
Okay. All right. Nadia.
I think, Pete, that we can do both, and I believe with all my heart that the UK government should be supporting Ukraine. We should be sending arms to Ukraine. We should be doing far more to support Ukrainian refugees, in my view. But we can also, we're the 6th biggest economy in the world, and we can also afford to make sure that no child is going to school hungry, that people aren't having to choose between heating and eating. And the question is, when we've got profits for just a few companies soaring, what do we squeeze? We need to squeeze those profits instead of squeezing people's wages, because prices are going up. I mean, you don't need me to tell you this. You'll be experiencing it yourself. The vast majority of people are. And yet wages have stayed the same. Wages in real terms now are lower than they were in 2008. I was 11 years old in 2008.
Okay,
that's not good enough.
Jimmy.
Well, look, I take the point about the amount of money that government is spending at the moment on things, and there's a lot still that we're paying for the COVID bill as well. The fact that furlough, and we paid 80% of people's wages throughout that as well. And, this is where all the bills are stacking up. And that's why there are problems with the economy. And that's why the markets had such a reaction to the idea the government was going to borrow more to fund tax cuts. And so, the government has put in place energy security in terms of the next 6 months and paying some of the bills now. That's obviously been rowed back from 2 years, but I do think let's see where we are with April. It's very difficult to predict what's going to be happening in Ukraine and Russia over that period, and let's assess things then. I mean, the government wants to do all it can to help people with energy bills, but this is, and to use a phrase that is off-trotted out at the moment, these are unprecedented times.
Simon?
Well, I actually think the question that Pete's asking is one that certainly in the United States is already reflected in the political conversation. And it is very clear. There have been warnings over the last few days from leading figures on Capitol Hill, among them Republicans, that if the Republicans triumph in the midterm elections and take control of the House of Representatives and possibly also the Senate, and we're now 19 days away from those elections, it is going to become much harder for Joe Biden to get additional millions and millions of dollars worth of aid for Ukraine, that this is going to become a political sticking point because many of these Republican candidates have used precisely the questions that Pete was raising in his call on the campaign trail. I think also there must be some very difficult conversations taking place in Washington between Ben Wallace and the Biden administration. Can Ben Wallace say definitively that the British government is still on track to spend 2.5% of its GDP on defence by 2026, as he has pledged? Does he have the backing of Jeremy Hunt for that? Does he have still the backing of Liz Truss for that? There will be questions in the United States about that commitment, about the commitment to Ukraine, and much more broadly, as we've already seen. I mean, Joe Biden, has been now directly outspoken in terms of his criticism of the mini budget and the initiatives that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss put into the public domain all those days ago. I think there are really big questions here about how Prime Minister Liz Truss, if she remains in office for any period of time, can enjoy anything approximating a fruitful relationship with an American president who's publicly excoriated her now.
Charlie?
Well, I couldn't disagree with anybody here, and I certainly agree with Nadia that we need to do all that we can to help Ukraine. And it's important to then recognise only by helping Ukraine you can then bring this conflict to an end, which actually then impacts on people's energy bills, because it is the war in Ukraine that is forcing energy bills up through oil and gas. So as soon as that conflict comes to an end, obviously you'd hope to see a return to the normal market. Of course, there are other
not completely.
Of course, I was about to say, of course, there are other issues within the UK economy, whether it's cost of living crisis, on other issues that are not directly affected. Of course, the government will need to look at all that it can do to help those that are the most vulnerable. But I think it's just important. I can't add anything more than what others have said, other than to say that the reason why we are helping all that we can in Ukraine is to ensure that that conflict comes to an end, and that will help us here back at home.
Pete, thank you very much. Shuvik in Eltham has texted in to say, what are the chances that Donald Trump will return to the White House, Simon Marks?
Well, I think you would be a brave man to rule it out. I think that the road has become more perilous for him and more complicated than it was before many of the investigations into his conduct advanced. However, he is clearly pinning his hopes on Republican victories in the midterm elections next month, because if the Republicans do indeed win control of the House of Representatives, which seems highly likely, that will bring, for example, the January the 6th congressional investigation to a crashing halt, and Republicans in the majority in the House of Representatives will immediately have the chance to form committees of their own early next year, hauling the director of the FBI, the Attorney General and others up to Capitol Hill to explain why they have engaged in a witch hunt against Donald Trump. So he is in very complicated legal and political waters, but he's absolutely not at this point yet a drowning man. There are certainly other Republicans out there that are likely to challenge him for the nomination, including Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. I think keep a very close eye on Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia. Many Republicans believe that he has the secret sauce. He found a way of winning the keys to the governor's mansion in Virginia while keeping Donald Trump on side but at bay. So I think we're in for a very, very interesting nomination battle that we will be covering, of course, every jot of it on LBC. But I don't think you can rule Donald Trump out in terms of becoming the nominee. And you certainly can't rule him out in terms of winning a presidential election, because if you look at the matchups, even now, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, when you project that in the polling, Donald Trump has a 2-point advantage over Joe Biden, which is astounding.
I'm told by sources close to Donald Trump, sort of, well, actually not very close, that he will announce after the November midterms.
Well, he'd have to. I mean, there have been suggestions that he was all thinking of announcing before the midterms, which is very unusual, but might have been a savvy move, because it would afford him a layer of protection, perhaps against some of these investigations. But, you know, the first question that is going to be asked of both Joe Biden and Donald Trump immediately after the midterms will be, are you running again? And it will be harder for, not impossible, but harder for the Department of Justice to pursue criminal charges and investigations against someone who is a declared candidate for the presidency than it is for them to do it while he's an undeclared candidate for the presidency. So for every reason, he's got an interest in declaring soon.
Presumably there'll be big questions about social media, because that's how he came to the presidency before. He's not allowed on any of them at the moment.
Well, I mean, so the Elon Musk Twitter deal becomes a fundamental question, right? If Elon Musk goes ahead and the Twitter deal goes through, the first question for him will be, are you really going to allow Donald Trump back on the platform? And he certainly indicated that he would. Donald Trump, of course, he doesn't want to be on Twitter, but you know, I mean, he was more than happy staying on his own little-used site, Truth Social. I mean, I think that one would have to think that it's quite likely that a Musk-run Twitter would allow Trump back on.
Nadia, do you think Trump will become president again?
God, I really hope not. I think that would spell disaster for not just people, particularly people who are economically or socially marginalised in the USA, but also across the world. He's incited hatred, he's emboldened the far right, and we're already seeing the rise of fascism and the rise of the far right across the globe, whether that's in Brazil, in India, in Hungary with Orban. And I think what it does show is that we've got to keep building movements across national borders in the same way, actually, as the far right does, because the far right organises globally, and so must progressives.
Okay, Charlie?
Well, it's been hard enough keeping up with UK politics just in the last few hours, so I'm not abreast on US politics as much as I want to be, but you can't rule anything out.
Would you welcome it?
I think if we had a longer discussion, there are obviously some good things that Donald Trump did, and I think in terms of, perhaps not in terms of his...
You'd have long enough to think of them.
Well, I think, in terms of some of his, approaches in terms of foreign policy, I think he was very good. However bullish it might have appeared, he was able to extract more money from European countries to fund NATO. He was the first US president, I think, to go and visit Kim Jong-un in North Korea to try and bring about some sort of peaceful arrangement. So you can't rule these things out as totally
And he did warn the
negative things.
Germans about the perils of relying entirely on Russian gas and oil, with the German delegation at the United Nations chuckling away as he sent a message direct to Chancellor Merkel.
So there was also
Very quickly, Jimmy?
I wouldn't particularly welcome it, but I do think there are some interesting things. I can't see why he won't run. I mean, I just think he is, that way inclined that he will want to be the centre of attention. So totally. I think the actual question about whether he runs or not is that he almost certainly will. Whether he wins, wouldn't want to make a prediction.
Right, well, we have our fun text question at the end of the programme now, which strikes fear into the heart of most people. Mandy's in Barnstaple. It says, some more absolutely gorgeous photos have been published from the James Webb Telescope. So let me ask your panel, what's the best picture you've ever taken? It can't be a self-portrait, Simon.
I took a very nice picture just tonight of all the lights. I'm not sure it's the best one I've ever taken, but I took a very nice shot of all the lights over the River Thames and the Eye and County Hall, which was actually quite relaxing in a way, because while all this chaos is playing out around you, it reminds you that we are here in the centre of London in an absolutely extraordinary city, my hometown. I'm delighted to be back. I know that things are extremely difficult and extremely tough, but a walk across Westminster Bridge is still a deeply alluring and emotional thing for those of us attached to the UK but not currently living in it.
Charlie?
Well, the honest answer is probably a photo on the Jurassic coastal path in Sidmouth, but which is on my Twitter, if anybody who else wants to...
It's a great question for a radio programme, isn't it, to talk about pictures?
Yes, but I think the other one is probably a selfie of all of us on this panel to mark the occasion that we got through. We
should do one, shouldn't we? Nadia?
I raised Simon's River Thames, the River Trent. So last week I was at the Aston Villa Forest game at City Ground with my mum, and I don't know whether it's the best picture I've ever taken, but how the Forest song goes, the mist rolls in from the Trent, and took a really nice picture of the I've been told that I've got a really laddie football chanting voice, but then I'm an absolute wuss when it gets on. I can't watch. I took a really nice picture of the City Ground with the tricky tree and the lights.
You see, that means Jimmy's now going to mention Derby County.
It is. Do you know what? I have got an answer on that as well. One of my favourite photos is the Theresa May campaign bus outside of Pride Park Stadium during the 2017 general election, a photo that I took with my wife. So that will be my choice for that.
There's definitely a joke in there about, both being losers or something. I don't know. I can't quite formulate it. And people in glass houses and all of that. We'll get there.
I was flicking through my phone just now trying to find a picture that I took in my garden where I suddenly noticed there was a deer sitting in my garden and it was snowing, and it was just the most brilliant scene, which I ought to sort of have it printed and blown up.
You don't live in inner city London, though.
I don't live in inner city London, it has to be said. Right, thank you all very much indeed for joining us. Nadia Whittome, Charlie Rowley, Jimmy McLoughlin and Simon Marks. In a moment, we're going to be talking about fracking. We've got two experts, one pro-fracking, one anti. If you've got questions on fracking, because I suspect that, like me, many of you aren't experts on it yourselves, but want to know a bit more, we're going to take your questions. We're going to get their opinions as well on the back of this vote that took place in the House of Commons this evening. 0345 6060 973. It's 3 minutes past 9.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, a Labour motion in the Commons that would have forced a vote on a bill to ban fracking has been defeated, but it comes amid farcical scenes in the House of Commons.